We have in today's gospel the beautiful passage about the pilgrims to Emmaus, about the two disciples who were walking out from Jerusalem to the village of Emmaus. And along the way comes this mysterious guest, someone who doesn't identify himself or that they do not recognize. And it seems like Jesus is kind of playing dumb here and leading them along. And they say, well, how do you not know what happened in Jerusalem? How do you know not about how this Jesus the Nazarene, how he was crucified and died? And then more astoundingly, that his tomb was found empty. And he is said to appear to some of our disciples. And it's interesting that he walks along with them and he goes he plays dumb again, and he wants to continue on. And they say, well, no, come have dinner with us. Come have dinner with us. And so they go in, and then Jesus, he takes the bread, and then he blesses it, he breaks it, and he gives it to him. And then what happens? He vanishes. And there's something very interesting I find going on here. I find that Jesus, here he is, he's drawing this whole thing out of these two disciples. I mean, they don't understand why Jesus had to suffer and be crucified. And then he explains all of the prophets to them and the laws, and he goes back and tells them about how this all led up to this great moment in the time of history. And here they are. It's like you can imagine their wonder when they're saying, well, see, oh yeah, I remember that, I remember this, and oh yeah, that happened, and how they're seeing, it's like how they're seeing how all these things fit together, and how it's kind of like all the pieces of a puzzle come together, and they understand these prophecies going back from Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel, and here they're seeing how this works together, and they're seeing maybe the symbolism of sacrifices in the law, or they're finding about how the Passover and how that led up to Jesus and the Lamb and all these things that are going on, and they're saying, oh yes, now we see how that all worked together and how that led up to Jesus having to die and to be crucified and then to rise again. And so then he takes, they go into the inn there, and they have their dinner, and Jesus takes that bread and he blesses it, he breaks it, and he gives it to them, and then he vanishes. And there's something very interesting about that, because what I take from that is you see, we have a lot of signs in our lives. We have a lot of exterior signs that lead us towards Jesus. We may have had good parents, a good father or mother that was a good example for us in our lives. We may have had other good people, good teachers, or good people in our lives who gave us good influences. We've made, maybe there are different stories that we've heard of, or books that we've read that also have helped build us up in our faith and helped lead us to Jesus. And also in the scripture, especially Holy Scripture, that is also leading us all to Jesus. But you see, what happens is he goes in, Jesus and the disciples go in the inn, and then he blesses and breaks the bread, and he gives it to him, and then he vanishes. So what I'm thinking here is maybe when we receive the Eucharist, I mean, that's the moment that we go within. That's the moment that we go into the silence, into the serenity, into the peace of being with Jesus. All these other things lead us up, like Scripture and all, they lead us up to Jesus. But when we receive him in the Eucharist, then at that moment, it's a moment maybe for us just to be silent and to be still and to be alone with Jesus and to be in there. And just think of the baby in the mother's arms, just the baby who's maybe has a cover over the baby, and that the little baby there is in the mother's arms, and she's swaying the baby and pacifying it, and then the baby falls asleep, and the mother is in admiration of the baby, and they're just they're very united, even though not a single word is exchanged, but yet they're united there. And that's those moments of deep, still prayer with Jesus, and especially after we receive him in the Eucharist, that we're called into this deep sense of peace and serenity and stillness, and just to be with Jesus. And so I think that's why He vanishes, exteriorly speaking. We have a lot of signs that lead us up to Jesus, but when we receive him, we have to find him within us. We have to find him there in that still silence within our hearts and minds and souls, because he is drawing us in. So everything leads us up, all these good things lead us up to the Eucharist, and then the Eucharist is the culmination. But then that, in some ways, goes beyond words. And so at that moment, we're called just to be silent and still, and to remain there with Jesus, that he dwells in us and we dwell in him.